Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for our December Clear Up the Chaos. I can't believe here we are at the end of the year. We again have lots of action items to get to, so I want to start on time. We have three individuals from Ironwood Business Consulting joining us. They're familiar faces by now, but Kevin Reynolds, Christine Beldner, and Amanda Flynn are here with us to visit about the vaccine mandate updates, what that looks like in the future, potential paths forward. So we're going to start off with that. If you have participated in any of our webinars in the past, we have used this platform in the past. It's called Mentimeter, and this just helps us get information to help us for future webinars. But if you would, and if you're interested in participating, please go to www.menti, M-E-N-T-I, and you'll see it here on the screen.com. And our code for this webinar is 3047-5006. And that will allow you the opportunity to participate when slides come up with questions. So I hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity. We also, toward the latter part of the webinar, are going to be speaking on the hard deadlines that are approaching in general HR year-end best practices. So I'm going to hand things off to Amanda for her to begin with, and we will go from there.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning, guys. I hope everybody's well. As Elizabeth mentioned, we're going to start out with COVID. It's still, the hot topic and the question we're getting the most from on a day-to-day basis. To kind of let you know here at the beginning, I'm going to walk us through what's been happening in the last month and give you a bit of an idea about where we stand and what the next steps might be. And then we've got a couple of the questions that we're getting asked the most that we'll talk to you about. And specifically then we'll switch to Kevin's going to talk to some of Governor Abbott's responses to that. And then also more of the OSHA aspect of it. So that part is going to come second, because I know that's one of the hot topics that we get the most questions about sometimes. But just to give you a bit of history here, it seems like both a lot has happened in the last month and not very much. I feel like if you're just watching, for potential news coverage, then it feels like, you got the high points and don't know that there are background things going on. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what happened. I'm going to really try to stay in chronological order here, but I can't make any promises. And so when we spoke this time last month, the ETS had just come out. It was really only in place for a day before the Fifth Circuit out of New Orleans issued a stay on that order. That is where we were when we spoke last month. Since then, the Fifth Circuit then reaffirmed that stay. And some of the things that were brought up in that suit, as well as there was more than 34 suits filed nationwide, the points of contention, go in different directions, but addressing the over-inclusive nature of the ETS as a whole. And again, that ETS is emergency temporary standards. So speaking to, organizations are so specific and singular that, one rule to work for everyone isn't going to be realistic, that it's putting too much of a burden on employers. On the same side, cases were also made that it was under-inclusive, that, if this is truly a grave danger to employees, then why does it not include the workforce less than 100 people? So there were lots of different points that were brought up. Again, everything circling around most of the time the grave danger, since it was so heavily referenced within the ETS as the reason as to why OSHA needed to issue this standard. At that point, once the appeals process went into the Fifth and they were filed all over the country, there are 12 different regional circuit courts. And it's really interesting and kind of humorous to me that I can't get past is when that happens, they consolidate all of that into a singular court. And to do that, all of the courts that had cases, so all 12, they literally put like ping pong balls in a drum, and then they pick out a court number, and that is how it is decided as to which court is going to hear the consolidated case. So that happened, and then it was decided that it's going to go to the Sixth Circuit. So we were in the Fifth before, now they consolidated all of the cases. Now it's going to the Sixth Circuit in Cincinnati. Of note there, it is considered a more conservative court if you're trying to look at that in one direction or another, very similar to the makeup of the ETS. There, of the 28 judges, 20 of them are Republican, 8 of them are Democrat. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean this is going to go one way or the other. Within those 28 judges, a 3-judge panel will actually be selected, and that will be at random, and those will be the ones issuing it out of the Sixth Circuit. All of that to be said, Sixth Circuit rule, we could still end up rolling to the Supreme Court. So it's probably a lot more specifics than you guys wanted, but I thought a few of those, little tidbits were really interesting. And also happening at this time and still currently is, once that stay went in and was reaffirmed and we went in started all of the legal proceedings, OSHA did officially suspend all of their activities related to implementation and enforcement. And they said pending future developments and litigation, which is important because one of those timelines have already passed, with it being the 14th. When we spoke about this last month, there was an early December deadline and an early January deadline to start putting the policies and procedures and practices in place. Again, since then, the government and the Biden administration again filed another motion to dissolve the stay. The most recent development is that was denied this week. So no change there. Things to keep in mind, though, while we are considering that we're still here in the present, is that if the stay were to be lifted, there's still quite a bit of administrative burden put on employers that you wouldn't be able to just turn out in a day, because you have to come up with these policies and procedures and have a plan and have consensus. So kind of keeping that in the back of your mind, that we don't know what the timeline is going to be if part or all of the stay was lifted. When the ETS first came out, we were given 30 days for some aspects of it and 60 then for the testing aspects. We don't know if they'll extend those deadlines or not. We just don't know what OSHA would push to do if the stay were to be lifted. Also kind of interesting of note, when that ETS went into place, the temporary standard is good for up to 6 months. And it's then rolls into the whole OSHA process that I won't pretend to be the expert at. Kevin's going to speak to that a little bit more on the OSHA side. But that deadline doesn't get extended just because the stay is in place. So even though we've been at a standstill for a month, essentially, that doesn't mean it's now, if it was approved, it'd be 7 months from now. That clock is still ticking on the original ETS, no matter how long it takes to get through the Sixth Circuit, excuse me. So in looking at moving forward, this could go a lot of different ways. And again, we don't exactly know. There are different paths where the ETS could still become part of our day-to-day lives and be mandated and enforced. And in doing that, it could become a permanent standard. So all of that 6 months timeline that I was just discussing would be out the window, because it would now, be a permanent standard. They are still accepting public comment, them being OSHA, which is interesting. They've extended that deadline on their website to get feedback from the public until January 19th. They said to date, the most public comment that OSHA had ever received was 11,000 responses. And as of now, over 100,000 people have commented on this. So, far and wide more attention than OSHA has gotten from the public and private employers. Again, with that, Sixth Circuit could come back, and as I've already mentioned, this could still roll to the Supreme Court. So that it still may be a limbo period for a period of time. Again, right now, what to do, keep in mind all of the administrative burdens that we've mentioned that probably still need to be thinking about with your executive team what your plan might be if some of these regulations stay in place, so that you've at least got a game plan. And we have seen a lot more employers, well, about 10% more, they're saying, actually go ahead and issue a mandate at this time. And then again, there's a lot that are waiting and seeing what's going to happen. So that's something, again, that you're going to have to decide as a business and as a whole, what level of risk you want to tolerate, how much and how quickly you'd be able to get a program together for your employees and your population. So just keeping all of these factors in mind as we are here in this holding pattern. So again, what should we do now? Gather your facts and information, obviously keep up to date on information as it's coming out. You've evaluated your risk tolerance. We don't know the outcome, but again, there's quite a bit of administrative burden. There was rosters that have to become, you either have to have 1 or 2 policies. There were about 10 different pieces of paperwork or ideas and procedures that you were going to have to create internally that would have to be active. So keeping all of those ideas in mind, and that we don't really know the outcome and what that might be. Changing gears just a tad bit, we've been speaking to the ETS that impacted the most amount of people, that private employers with 100 or more employees. At the same time, there was a separate vaccine mandate for federal contractors and subcontractors, and I know that at least came up once in these sessions. That has also been blocked nationwide at the moment. And I'm saying nationwide because that's being reported. Of course, if you're outside of Texas, you're going to always want to check your local laws and make sure that that's accurate within your state. So the federal subcontractor and federal contractors is also on hold. And the only thing still in place at this time, and again, I'm not even going to say nationwide because it could be different state to state and even city to city right now, would be the mandate for those Medicaid certified providers and specialists. So you're thinking more your healthcare workers in those settings. And so that is still standing as of right now. The most questions that we have got about this has been speaking to, okay, but what about when the states have issued bans and mandates of their own? What happens if employees refuse, and the unemployment piece? What might happen if OSHA really comes into play? And so I'm going to hand it off to Kevin, and he is going to speak to that. So let me share my screen so you guys can see some of the items.
Perfect. Amanda, are you sharing your screen?
Can you see me now?
I do. Outstanding. Thanks, guys, for your time. So what we want to talk about, first, I wanted to expand a little bit on what Amanda said, which was in regards to the OSHA request for comment. What people don't know in the deeper details of that is OSHA is actually moving forward with writing their own standard. OSHA is not relying on winning this ETS. So even if they lose this ETS, they are looking to write a COVID OSHA regulation that does not have the same scrutiny, doesn't hold to the same court overview. So that will probably be a coming topic going into January and February when we talk with you guys for that reason. So when we talk about the ETS and preparing, we provided, you're actually one of the first group that we let you know that we have a full list of documents. We developed our own website location for finding our recordings from the last presentation, finding what to do, helpful links, and we're putting in a bunch of policies. So even if this ETS is not successful, we fully expect that the OSHA standard that is being developed in the coming months will become our next talking point. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but just giving you a heads up. So what was interesting is when that federal contractor mandate was put on hold, either the same day or the very next day, the Texas Workforce Commission, obviously from the direction of Governor Abbott, put out a letter. You guys probably received it or ignored it, didn't know what it really meant. But basically, it was a pretty strong letter stating a couple of key things. One, people misinterpret Abbott's there'll be no vaccine in the state. Well, no, not exactly. What they're saying is basically employees have the right to object to the vaccination for personal consciousness. If they have a personal reason for not wanting to take the vaccine, that was enough for them to deny accepting the vaccine. When on the federal basis on an ETS, we always talked about religious belief for medical reasons, but for personal consciousness is something that Abbott was real big on pushing. So he came up with this letter basically saying from the Texas Workforce Commission, saying that you can still, if an employer is going to still mandate a vaccine, and this is kind of clips from that letter. If you're going to mandate the vaccine, unemployment still may be a reason to get paid because they refuse. So what Abbott is saying is, if an employee refuses the vaccine and you terminate that employee for refusing, that will most likely, not guaranteed, but most likely be a reason to qualify for unemployment. Because Abbott is very pro-anti-vaccine, he's pushing that agenda through the Texas Workforce Commission. So if you are going to implement that vaccine requirement and the employees are going to refuse it, first of all, they're making it clear that you are obligated to make the employees aware of their necessary exemptions. It's just not religious. It's just not medical. They can have a personal reason for refusing. And if you fail to do that, you're opening yourself up. And then if you terminate, which we've seen that you have that right to terminate for refusing the vaccine, you are likely going to affect your unemployment rates. And they're making it clear. There's a lot more language within that letter that talks about the confusion the federal government is causing, a lot of political rhetoric in that letter, but really the core to that letter is this section. You have to notify the employees of their exemptions and why. And if you choose to terminate anyways, they could be qualified for unemployment. So keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to what we're seeing with OSHA, OSHA has, I've always called it compliance by shaming. OSHA has always had a policy that they love to notify, and Google picks this up immediately, when an employer is accused of doing something incorrectly. I only went back just a month and a half, and I've already found, just in Texas, multiple businesses. And let's start first. This is Peterbilt, huge company. We would think Peterbilt would be, have big pockets to pay. What OSHA has done is they've basically gone the route of compliance by shaming, and they've notified through the whistleblowing protections that Peterbilt had an employee that did not feel safe in the work environment because of how they were going to take care of COVID sanitation procedures. So when the employee raised concerns, they fired the employee, or at least that's the statement the government is making. So the one thing that we always try to stress with businesses, HR can really bleed into OSHA, and when it comes to whistleblowing protections. There's two kinds of cases with OSHA. There's that work-related cases in your facility, but the whistleblowing, in which we handle, and we've handled hundreds of them. But when it comes to the OSHA and the whistleblowing side, it's a much different beast. The burden of evidence, the length of the investigations, and the fines become huge. What OSHA does is they sue the company. Peterbilt's got lots of attorneys to defend themselves, but they sue the company saying you got to pay damages, you've got to pay back wages, and on and on and on. So when it came to this case, didn't draw a lot of eyes. But the next case was a smaller employer. It was actually a car dealership in Austin. And basically this case, and this is really, if you think about, because we're talking HR, this case was an employee saying, I have COVID. You need to let everyone know that I have COVID. Now, this is what the government is saying. This is what the employees are saying. You guys being on the HR side of things know that those usually there's obviously two sides of the case, two sides of the story. But in this instance, the employee was saying, I have COVID. You need to tell everyone I have COVID. The employer likely was trying to come up with a game plan of what to do. And if you notice the very last sentence, less than an hour after notifying the employee, the employee notified everyone of that employee having COVID. So I don't know the timeline, how long it took, but most likely the employer was navigating, how are we going to notify everyone? Probably a bit of a panic. And then the employee took it on themselves to notify everyone and emailed everyone, I have COVID. And then this is where the HR breakdown occurred. Within an hour, they probably didn't have a competent HR person in place or consultants or resources. They decided to terminate the employee, which on the surface seems reasonable, but in the whistleblowing protection laws, it's not. It's not at all. Now, what's interesting, and I know we have some medical groups within Elizabeth's client base. This one was just recent also. This was July 15th. This was a dentist, North Texas dentist. What's interesting and what you always got to be mindful of, this is a case that started in the spring of 2020. But if you look at the date, this case started July 15th this year. So just because we have a few months between those poor decisions or those not thought out decisions that you guys are making doesn't insulate you from a potential whistleblowing claim. Under this one, again, no one's guilty in all three of these cases. They just filed a lawsuit. Now, what's interesting when OSHA does this compliance by shaming, they don't rescind these cases. If this company wins this case in court, this OSHA news release and this Google finding this news release, it doesn't go away. OSHA doesn't say, oops, the employer was accurate. The employer was correct. The employer won the case. The employer did everything correctly. No, this shows the employer is exposing people to unsafe practices. So we don't want to find ourselves in that situation, obviously. So under this one was some hygienists that felt that they needed a good return to work process. The employee said that they raised some safety concerns, which employees have a right to raise those safety concerns, and employers have the right to address them and say, you know what, that's really not valid. So there could have been a lot of he said, she said in this type of case, but just like most small businesses that we advise, especially with NCW, you just don't know how to navigate it because you think common sense applies, and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times it doesn't with OSHA, honestly. But the reality is that's why you need to turn to Ironwood, turn to trusted resources if you don't know how to navigate these really tricky HR situations. That is the reason why Elizabeth and NCW and Sanford Tatum provide you resources, pulling us in when you need to navigate these tricky parts. So that was my topic on the good old scary OSHA stuff. I'll hand it off to, I think it's Christine.
Kevin.
All right, I just wanted to take a minute. Elizabeth, did you receive any questions?
I have received no questions so far.
All right. Amanda, I think we have a moment. We were going to ask our first question.
Okay, and there's that information again. We are not moving forward like we're supposed to. Okay, if you go to that Menti site and enter the code, the question that we asked is what you're concerned about moving into 2022. And we've got several choices here for you. These may not be exactly, your concerns. There's actually going to be a second version of the question that's just open-ended. I'm going to leave the polls open. A lot of times we do these live and look at the numbers live. There are two different questions in there. Same question, but there's an open-ended and a polling type. So we'll leave this open through the rest of the webinar so that if you want to think about your answer and be able to read through that, you're more than welcome to do that. And let me give it back to Christine.
All right. So we're going to start tackling the end of year checklist. And we're going to kind of approach this from several different angles. So let's first look from an HR standpoint. And we will send these following today's presentation, so you really don't have to focus on writing these things down, and you can just really kind of listen. So now, if you haven't already done so, you're going to be looking at reconciling all that vacation, sick, pay time off, whatever it is that you call that at your company, those balances for any year-end payout, if you guys do that, or any carryover, if it applies to your organization. And if you don't have any payout or carryover and you start accruing fresh, just make sure that you're in coordination with your payroll team or your accounting team to restart those balances or those accruals starting January 1st. So just make sure that that's on your radar. You're going to be thinking about your personnel files. So you're going to want to be pulling those employees that terminated this year, and then think about any of your other records retention guidelines that you typically follow. So now is a good time for just general housekeeping of any of your files that you have, whether that be in paper or electronic format. It's time for that annual message to your employees if they want to make any changes to their federal withholding. And what's not listed here is to, it's a good reminder if they want to make any adjustments to their state withholding. For example, Colorado for the first time actually has a state withholding form new for 2022. So if you have employees in Colorado, you would want to make them aware of that. So just something to keep in mind. So send that reminder if they want to make changes for the W-4. Go ahead and investigate the states that your employees reside in and see if there's been any changes into those states' W-4 forms as well. Ensure that your required postings are current. I can't tell you how many times our safety team goes on site for those safety audits, and that is too often a finding that those required postings are out of date and they are so discolored that you can tell that they are original to when that building was probably constructed. So that is an easy, low cost, compliance way that your company can come current with the times. And you don't even really have to spend money. Most of those required postings you can print online for free. I know I have shared and Amanda has shared with Elizabeth a way that you can search, does these required postings apply to my company, by answering a short survey. So, and it'll walk you through it on a federal site. So Elizabeth, we can send you that again today if that would be helpful for those on the call. So,
Yes, that would
um,
be great, Christine. And
okay,
also I want to
sure.
note, I can send out, I have access to a lot of those documents for those postings. They're not, a full big poster, they're individual,
Yep.
where you'd have to print them and laminate them or whatever organization chooses to do. But I'll include that as well in the follow-up email.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, and then it's time to communicate your 2022 holiday schedule and discuss any holiday adjustments. We saw a lot of questions last year in 2021 about whether employers were going to add Juneteenth as an official holiday. Don't wait until June to have that conversation. Have that conversation now with your team, with your management team, your executive team, and that way it doesn't look like come June that you're having that conversation out of pressure or necessity. Have it now and be forward thinking. And I think your employees will appreciate it. Make a deliberate decision. Go ahead and create your 2022 payroll calendar if you haven't already done so, and communicate that. And you can combine that payroll and calendar and that holiday schedule into one. Now is a great time. We're at Ironwood, we're huge advocates of keeping that employee handbook current. If you can't find your employee handbook, if you don't know when the last time you've opened that employee handbook, now is definitely a time to review and update it. Even at Ironwood, we have set our own internal goal that it's time to review it and update our own. So, we're holding ourselves accountable to the same thing that, we're encouraging you guys to do. So we highly encourage that. It's definitely time to dust that sucker off. And this is something that the next one that I'm mentioning, probably you haven't considered, but if your HR department hasn't conducted an internal self audit, don't wait until you're halfway in the year to say, hey, we should probably do it. Plan for it now. Look at your team and say, let's develop a schedule for the coming year. Let's make it a goal. Consider auditing your I-9s in your first quarter. Maybe do a compliance audit in your second quarter. Do your handbook audit in the third quarter. Whatever it is, if you plan for it now and you lay it out for the entire year, then you're more likely to follow through. So make it part of your checklist now. Then you're more likely to make it happen. Of course, now is a good time to go ahead and review your job descriptions. If you don't have job descriptions, now is a great time to say it's something that we need to make and perform those testings to see if your positions that you have made that determination they're exempt. Are they truly still exempt? That could be some of your year-end checklists. And maybe some of this carries over into January because I know we're halfway already into December. But again, some of this is hard deadlines for 2021, and some of it is goal setting for early 2022. Amanda, if you don't mind. All right, moving from HR, we're going to move now to some of our payroll. All right, so, and again, we're kind of envisioning that we've got some people that toe the line between HR and payroll on the webinar today. So if that's not your role, please pass these tasks on to those in your company that have those duties. But now's the time to true up your benefit premium payments just to make sure that what was truly withheld from your employees was what was actually paid out to the vendors. Audit all your payroll accounts and address any issues. You want to make sure that the right Social Security was withheld, the right Medicare taxes withheld, all those things. Trust me, from experience, now is the time to gather those missing W-9s from any vendors performing work in 2021. It is not January 29th that you want to be requesting those W-9s, because those are not fun to get when you're having to process those 1099s, because then it's really challenging to get those from those vendors. If you print your own W-2s and your own 1099s, now is when you want to order those blank tax forms instead of waiting till January. And of course, if you use a software like QuickBooks, they should be alerting you, hey, now's the time to order those tax forms. But in case you haven't been alerted, now is a good reminder to go ahead and order your forms. And then I know that I have my own spreadsheet that I use to cross-check my accounting software for calculating my W-2 information. So I'm already starting to gather my W-2 cross-checks, and I'm already performing my calculation. So if you're like me, now is the time to go ahead and start gathering. You've got Q1 through Q3 information already complete. So go ahead and start calculating that information. At the start of this call, before the rest of you guys were on, I shared with Elizabeth, Amanda, and Kevin that it is now the accounting Super Bowl. We're not shutting down for Christmas. We're just gearing up. So we have the first 3 quarters of information. Let's not wait until Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. Let's start gathering what we can and making that happen. All right, on the benefits side, a lot of us have just gone through open enrollment. So a lot of this is probably already complete, but if not, we know we're at the tail end of this. So you've probably gone through where you verified your current employee and information, and you verify that it's accurate and their dependent coverage is accurate. But if not, I just did that audit, and even after open enrollment, I found 3 employees following open enrollment whose coverages through open enrollment, the vendor did not set up correctly. So don't necessarily trust that your benefits brokers through open enrollment set up your employees correctly. Always do those double checks and for yourself. And then, of course, make sure your new health and dental insurance cards have been distributed if you're just now through your open enrollment. If you have those 401k plans, you're probably gearing up for your annual highly compensation, your safe harbor, any kind of annual testing. So you know that typically your providers are going to start sending you your spreadsheets to gather that information. So probably not a whole lot for you to do yet, other than be looking for their email and not ignore it. Pay attention there to that email request. If you're running your own payroll or if you have an outside accounting person and you have a payroll or 2 left, make sure that you're taking care of that imputed income on that last payroll if you provide life insurance for your employees. So according to the IRS, any life insurance that the company provides over $50,000 in term is considered taxable income. So if you need help understanding what's required from a company to run that as imputed income, reach out to Ironwood. I can kind of walk you through what that calculation looks like. I can even send you a good spreadsheet as a template to help you run those calculations. But now's the time. You want to run that actually through your payroll. You run it through, there's a couple different ways you can do it. And there's a decision that needs to be made, whether as the company you want to absorb the tax or if you want to pass that tax burden on to the employees. And now is a good time, if you guys have an FSA, a flexible spending account, to remind your employees it's use or lose time. So if they have money left in those accounts, they need to use up those benefits. I'm not sure if my other slide made it into the presentation or not. If it didn't, I could kind of just speak to some of the other things that I had. Some of the other things that I had was it's time for a physical property inventory. Definitely time for some tax review and planning. Um, Consider an IT assessment. I know at Ironwood, we just went through, where are we at on our backups? Where are we at in terms of our costs? Perhaps it's time for a marketing refresh. Those are all things to consider. And then don't forget, oh, thanks, Amanda. Don't forget strategy. I think sometimes it's easy for us, especially small to medium-sized businesses. We really get into the weeds, right? And we have to take the time to pull ourselves out of the day-to-day. So as we wrap up the year, I hope you can find some time to think and pull together your 2021 achievements. I think on that list of achievements is no one anticipated still having to navigate COVID through a second year. And that should be certainly on the list of achievements. So I encourage as a company, taking that task. Developing and communicating your 2022 company goals and strategies. Encourage at Ironwood all companies to look at what are the company goals and strategies, look at your departments and look at it individually, and make that something you're going to communicate in January. And then again, continuing that conversation in 2022. What's your strategy? How will your company continue to navigate the pandemic? We just had one of our clients reach out. They still have their break rooms closed due to COVID. And so there are still companies that at various levels of adapting to COVID. Some are definitely still wearing masks. Some are still very much social distancing. So, we are still having this COVID conversation going into our third employment year. So that needs to be part of your strategy conversation going into 2022. And then how is your workforce coping? What's the pulse? So that is the summary of the end of year checklist, things that we judge that you guys should be thinking about. But of course, if you go online and just search end of year checklist for small business or for HR or for accounting, you'll find countless other things. And then reach out to Ironwood if there's a question. If it should be on your checklist, we'll be happy to let you know.
Thank you, Christine. I haven't checked in the last few days, but have y'all updated your site with the policies, or is that something y'all are still working on?
We are still working on, it's still a trickle. I know there's been 1 or 2 more documents posted. There's probably 3 or 4 that'll be posted again today. So it's ever evolving as we wrap them up. So of course, when the various stays were issued, the urgency changed.
Right.
And then we were responding more to the questions. They were of higher priority, but continue to reach out. And I think that's going to be a slide that Amanda has today with that link. And then we'll send it again for you to send as a follow-up. But a lot more will be posted this week, more even today.
Perfect. Thank you. I do want to open this time up for questions. As a reminder, you can either unmute yourself or send those questions via the chat box, and I'm happy to relay those to the Ironwood team. A friendly reminder, as a client of NCW and Sanford Tatum, you do have complimentary access to Ironwood and their team. So if you haven't taken the time yet to complete that agreement, that might be something that you add to your 2022 to-do list. Because it's always best to have that in place prior to a crisis. I always say it's even more stressful when you're trying to get help and you're trying to get paperwork completed. It's best just to have that completed, and then that way it's smooth sailing when there is an issue. I will include that agreement if that is something that you and your organization are interested in completing for the 2022 year. So I'll include that in the email. So Christine, Amanda, and Kevin, I haven't received any questions. So if y'all have anything left to share or close us out with, feel free.
Well, we appreciate you guys' time. You know, as Elizabeth said, there's a lot of resources at your disposal that NCW and Sanford Tatum cover for you guys. The one thing just to keep in mind is we've got OSHA experts, we've got DOT experts, and phenomenal HR experts. I like to brag on Amanda and Christine. Just reach out. That's why we're here. Google's not your friend when it comes to navigating the regulatory gray area. We are, and we look forward to helping you any way we can. Happy to help, and hope you guys have a happy holidays.
Yes, thank you all so much for your time, and I will be sending the recording if you're interested in sharing that internally, as well as the follow-up with the things that we have discussed. So wishing you a happy holiday season with your family and friends, and I will be talking with each of you in January. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.